In the Huddle was created to give student athletes, parents and coaches an inside look at the journey through US college sport and all that comes with it. The demands, the experiences, the excitement and the opportunities available to our student athletes from around the world. Study and Play USA facilitates a comprehensive, customised approach for student athletes and families for their whole journey, from their high school preparation years right through to US college graduation.
Hi to our listeners, Maria Hopes from Study and Play USA. In this episode of In the Huddle, you will be listening to two Colorado girls talking U.S. college rugby opportunities. We welcome one of our highly valued partners, Karen Fong Donoghue, former U.S. women's rugby star and founder of Rugger's Edge, an organization who has been guiding and educating rugby families worldwide for several years. Welcome to our podcast, Karen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to, I feel like podcasts are the new cool hip thing, so I must be pretty cool and hip now.
Oh, gosh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks for being here. In our work as a Colorado native, and I know you've lived there for a while now, would you be able, especially for Australian families, Colorado is kind of a state that, unless you're a skier, it's kind of off the radar. So how would you describe Colorado to all of our Australian listeners?
To Australia, and I love Australia. So, it's tough to compare because Australia is so wonderful as well. I'm originally from California. So the way I describe it, it's basically like, it's very similar, I think, to where I grew up, which is in Northern California. Just with snow in the winter, having seasons. But generally speaking, it's sunny. It's, I think it's just very outdoorsy, and, people here love to hike and bike and fish and hunt and all those sorts of things. So it just, it's a really lovely kind of lifestyle here. It's, but at the same time, not what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you're not also like letting go of things that you would associate with like a big city. You've got Denver. So, for someone like myself, when we weren't in a pandemic, I would love to see things like Broadway shows or have, maybe like a nice fancy dinner or something. You could have that, in Denver, which I live in the mountains. So it's about a 40-minute drive down the hill, but it's worth it. It's nice to live in the mountains, but be able to have access.
Yeah, still close to kind of that city center.
Yeah,
absolutely. And you guys, have you already had snow for the year?
We did that first. Was it a couple weeks ago in September? We got about 6 inches of snow here, so that was a bit of a shock. We were not prepared.
Yeah,
but then the next day it was like almost 100 degrees. So that's when we moved here about 6 years ago. It was definitely that, like, you got to dress in layers, bring everything in the car. Like, it's either going to be flip-flops and you'll be hot. And then the next, couple hours later, it'll be freezing and you'll want your snow jacket. So
exactly. Just be prepared for it all. Absolutely. Yeah. I miss Colorado. Enjoy that weather for us. Although I can't complain. Queensland is not a bad place to call home. That's for sure. So I know that you mentioned you grew up in Northern California. Are you able to just tell our listeners kind of about your journey into rugby and how that happened?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll try to keep it short because I think everyone, if you ask people their rugby story in the US, it's always a big, long, kind of to do. But generally speaking, so I grew up in Northern California. We did not have rugby for girls in high school. It's a little bit different now. There is more girls rugby here in the U.S. But the high school I went to in the Bay Area did have boys rugby. So I did see it. A lot of, my male friends and stuff, they played. So I'd see it on the weekends. I had no idea what was happening, but I at least was aware of it. And so when I went to college, I went to UC Davis, which is about an hour northeast of San Francisco. And the year I went, 1997. So if your listeners probably were born like way after I went to college. But when I got there, I saw an ad in the paper basically, and it said, we're starting up a women's rugby league and we're going to start a team here at Davis and come to this informational meeting if you're interested. And, I had originally gone to Davis thinking, I was going to try to walk onto the volleyball team.
Okay.
And if you've ever met me, I'm like barely 5'5". I'm like pushing 5'4". But I was very confident. I was like, of course, I work really hard. I played for a long time. Like, let me try. And of course that didn't happen, but I still really wanted to be a part of a team.
Yeah.
That was a big part of, what I did in high school and in college. I really envisioned myself being an athlete. And I figured, if this is the first year that rugby's happening on my campus and also at all these other campuses, I get to kind of start at the ground level. No one's going to know what's going on. So I won't be left behind, right? I think some sports like soccer, right? Like little girls and boys are playing when they're 3. There's no way I'm going to pick up soccer when I'm, 17, 18. And the bulk of rugby in the States is still very much like that, where many players are just picking it up in college, walking on, having a very similar experience to what I had. So, kind of walked onto that team, had that, if you ask many rugby players here in the States, if they had a similar experience, it's you go out to a field and people are like, all right, well, if someone's got a ball, you're going to tackle them. And if you have the ball, just run away from them. And I was hooked. I thought it was, I loved it. And one of the things I really fell in love with actually goes back to my little story about volleyball is, throughout my playing volleyball days, obviously my body type wasn't what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Right? I was too short. It was plain and simple. They're like, we can't look at anyone who's, less than 5'10", and that's for a setter, but if you're looking at outside hitters, middle blockers, I mean, you're in that 6 foot plus range. But then here's rugby where even then, I was still the same height, 5'4", maybe 120 plus pounds. I mean, I was tiny, and yet I was still succeeding, and I was succeeding at a really high level. I was getting selected for, all-star teams and representing, and it was just a really wonderful confidence booster to feel like I don't have to be more, I don't have to be taller. I don't have to be stronger. Like the skills that I had was what they needed. And that's always really wonderful to feel like you have a place on a team and a family, those sorts of things. And then obviously moving forward, I played in college, played afterwards for another, 5 years in the senior world and was in the national team pool for 7s and 15s. And then when I decided to go back to school to get my master's, I decided to hang up the boots and not play anymore. And I decided to go the referee route. And then I refereed through that elite pathway for, essentially another 10 years. And recently I've shifted a little bit more into the education route. So I'm a World Rugby educator and trainer as well. So now that's part of what I do is leading referee courses and then also help train the educators that are now leading those courses around the country. So it's all kind of come full circle. Everything's always like tied back to education, which is, it's just great. I love sharing what I love about rugby. And then, if that helps push more students towards, to college and secondary education, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. And it is amazing, isn't it? How you just need to show up, right? And you had just such a good attitude to put yourself out there. And then what an amazing, it's just literally changed your life, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Could you just, I know you mentioned, sort of when you were starting college, that there just really wasn't, that opportunity for women in rugby. How have you seen that change over the last 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, so in 1997, when this team started at Davis, it was the first year we had women's rugby at our campus, at University of Nevada, Reno, Humboldt State, Chico State, Stanford, San Jose, and Cal Berkeley. I think maybe Santa Clara was one of them. And that was the first year we started it in that region. Now there had been women's rugby at various different other areas, but it was pretty unorganized. Now, if you talk to people now, it is still a little bit disorganized, but I mean, 180 from what it used to be. And really the biggest change, if you're kind of keeping up with what's happening in the US, is obviously the shift from the club model, which is what I played in, which is more student driven. We had volunteer coaches that were actually just men's team players that had been injured and they wanted to stay involved. So they coached us. But everything was volunteer. You know, if we were going to a game, we were carpooling and splitting gas. If we're, playing another team somewhere, we were just getting put up in other players' like homes, and stuff like that. Now, you've got, 20 plus universities and colleges that are NCAA, so they're varsity level programs. And that's more in line with what probably, families think of when you think of U.S. Collegiate sports is NCAA varsity level programming, where it's just more professional. You have paid coaches, you have facilities, you have, all the transportation to getting to games and trainers and all of those pieces that help support players to perform well on a field without having to worry about those other things. So the push to having more varsity level programs is a big deal. So on the NCAA side and on the non-NCAA side. So something that I discuss a lot is in a weird way, the US, the thing I want to define is that if you're an NCAA program, so if you're Harvard, Dartmouth, Brown, Bowdoin, Sacred Heart, something like that, you're varsity because you're NCAA. But you can be varsity and not NCAA. So there are, versions like Life University, Lindenwood University, where they're varsity, meaning they're supported by the school, they're underneath the intercollegiate athletics department, but they have chosen not to follow the NCAA rules and regulations and those sorts of things. But just in general, I think the rise of, and I think it's a little bit chicken or the egg, but you've got more girls playing rugby in the States, and they're coming from programs that are also organized and put together. So those players don't want to go to a college and then play for, honestly, like a club team. They're like, we want to go somewhere and continue to be challenged and grow. So I think to meet that need, you see more teams at least, okay, we're club, and maybe we're a little more club varsity. We're going to get a little more support from the school. They're just kind of inching into the varsity realm, which I think in the next 10 years, I think we will see more of that.
Even more of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then on the other side of the coin, on the men's side, the major leagues with rugby and their professional competition, it seems to be gaining a lot of traction. And I know, with the not at the Olympics, do you think that this will attract more and more international players to the collegiate system?
Yeah, I mean, so I would say on both. I would say men and women. I definitely see on the women's side, whenever I see, we're announcing class of, like 2024, like you see the roster of the players they've recruited, and like 50% of them are international students. I think it is, it goes without saying that players that are coming from rugby playing countries are going to come in with way more rugby knowledge. They've been playing the sport much, much longer than typically here. Even if you have high school players, many of them still only pick it up at the earliest, maybe freshman year of high school, if their high school has a team. It's rare to find players that, played from the time they were, 5 and 6, which you see in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK and stuff like that. So you do see a lot more, I think, international families wanting to come to the U.S. For either, I would say that the main things, and you probably have a different perspective too. The main things that I would see is, I think that the rugby experience, the collegiate athletic experience here is different. The U.S., when you get to a team here, for better or worse, it is a big part of college. It is like you have these schools where like school spirit is all about sports, and I think a lot of the students enjoy kind of having that, I don't have to say fame, but it's like a big deal to be a student athlete. It's like you're wearing the gear and you're like a kind of another level of student. You get to kind of wear that badge of like, I'm representing Clemson, I'm representing Michigan. And it's like, it carries on into like when you graduate, these rugby teams and their alumni, that's like a big deal. And you kind of get pulled into this network. So I think the athletics plays a really big deal there. The men's side is similar to the women's in terms of there are more varsity programs that are growing. I think the varsity programs for both men and women, where the growth you're going to see is going to be in smaller schools. So they're not going to be the name brand schools like the ones I just said, like I don't see a varsity program going to University of Michigan or University of Washington anytime soon. I think that's a Title IX issue. Like it'd be really hard for that to happen.
Yeah.
But they can have a varsity program at, like these smaller regional ones, right? Like Nazareth College in New York, or you have these ones at New England College, right? That if you're in Australia, you're probably like, I have no idea where these schools are, but for the right student, it might be a really, really good fit. The last thing I'll say is what I find like insane whenever I talk to either international families or just in general, just to get the pure amount of choice. Like there's thousands of universities and colleges here. Like, especially when I talk to a family in say like Canada, right? They're like, so, we can choose from like, I don't know, 10, or whatever. It's a fairly condensed amount of colleges. And I'm like, well, what part of the country do you want? How big do you want it? Do you want it 1,500 or less, 3,000 or less, 5? I mean, there's just, it's like going into a store and being like, well, where do you want to, you go to Target and you're like, where do we start? Like, I don't know what I need. And you're trying to figure out what's going to be a good fit. So I think the US college system is different in that, like, we're really focused on what works for you may not work for someone else. And that's good. There's a place for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know you kind of mentioned that, our kids that are coming from Australia have grown up watching rugby from the time, they can open their eyeballs. And then again, have been playing in primary school and throughout. And like you said, or maybe coming onto a team where half of the team or a good portion of the team are walk-ons. So for you, do you have any advice for those student athletes who are coming in with this experience, but also, are walking into a team environment? Do you have advice for those kids?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure these are things you cover. I mean, I think one of the myths, especially coming from another country into the US, when we start talking about athletics, is it's that kind of like idea of, okay, I'm really good at my sport, right? I'm in this academy team and I'm already representing my territory. And I've been doing that since I was 15. Like, I'm so talented. This college in the US is going to give me a full ride. They're going to give me so much money because I'm so talented. It's that belief of just that your performance on the field is going to equal those dollars, right? And of course, in a perfect world, I'm a parent, like that'd be great. I would love to say that, but yeah. But rugby is just it's not American football. American football, has been around a lot longer, and there's a lot of revenue and money tied to collegiate football, which is where you then get these bigger like scholarship offers and the things you're going to see on the news. Rugby is still very young, and while there is some money to be had that will offset the total cost of coming here, it never covers the full cost. So I think if you have a very talented, you are a talented rugby player, you'd like to come to the US, have that experience of going to school here and living here in the US, as long as you're aware that no matter where you are in the athletic kind of spectrum of how talented you are, that's not going to carry over. It's really going to be your academic profile. So rugby can really, unfortunately, only take you so far. You still have to be admitted. So none of the rugby programs here, especially the higher end ones, they can't give you a pass. If you didn't do well in school, the theory here is they need to make sure you're going to be successful, because there's no reason to recruit you to go play at Cal Berkeley or Penn State or Army West Point or something like that, right? Really, really competitive schools. If you're just going to drop out after the first quarter, you can't make it academically. So I think that's a big thing. And then second to that, I would definitely approach recruiting. So let's say you get past that part and you're a player. You're like, look, I'm also, doing really well in school. I'd like to pursue this. I think one of the things that I share a lot with my players is this process of recruiting is a little bit like dating. And what I mean by that is you've got to show interest. You can't just fill out a form and expect that's it. They're going to ask you to marry them, You're trying to get a proposal, and that means engage. You've got to ask them about the program. And if they ask you questions, you have to answer. How would you feel if you, the young men I talked to or something, like, how would you feel if you, asked a potential, date, to tell me about why you're interested in me, and they don't respond for a week? You probably don't feel like they're very interested. So, making sure that prospects check their email. Recruiting goes through email. Yeah. Students these days really don't want to check email, but that is where coaches are saying, can you send me your test score? Can you send me transcripts? Let's set up a time to Zoom so we can meet each other. Yeah. And players answer a month later, and by then the coach has already moved on. So, showing that interest, showing them some love, it's got to be some back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we even find kind of on that other side of the coin, of course, that constant communication is so important. But when that dating analogy, sometimes we find, our kids do want to go to those big schools that you mentioned. They want to go to Berkeley, they want to go to Penn State because they've heard of those programs. But then sometimes, like you said, some of those smaller schools look different on paper, right? Than a Berkeley or a Penn or a Michigan.
Yeah.
And so we always say, just give them a chance. That Zoom is so important because it's like dating, somebody might look awesome on paper, and then you start having a conversation and you're just like, oh gosh, we don't get on as well as I thought I would. And then a recruit will talk with a program where maybe they didn't think on paper they were going to be as interested. And then they walk away from it and they just say, oh my gosh, that coach knew about me and watched my games, all these things. And it's just all of a sudden their focus changes, to this relationship that they had started fostering over Zoom. So kind of both ways where communication is so important, but also giving everybody a chance, at least for that first conversation, and then narrowing it down. So
I tell students all the time, my older sister is, she's a professional photographer, but she's one of those people, and you probably know someone, or you might be one of these people. She's really fashionable. And I always shop with her because she can look at things and go, I think this would look great on you. And I'm like, I don't know, that looks weird. I'm more simple, whatever. She'll say, just try it on. Mm-hmm. And then I'll try it on. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so flattering. I wouldn't have expected, that. So it's a very similar kind of thing where I'm like, you got to go shopping. You've got to try stuff on because you don't know how this college is going to fit. Mm-hmm. You might find you regionally want a really large college, but then you find that there's this other college that has your specific major in neuropsychology counseling, something really obscure. Yeah. That's what you want to do. So don't blow off those colleges until you've really gotten to know them and see if it fits. And that's what I'm always I always have this memory of being ugh, no way. Just put it on. So for students to trust their counselors or trust their advisors like you, you're telling them, hey, just check out this college, give them a chance. You've been through this a lot, and they hopefully will listen to you and say, okay, well, maybe I'll try it on. Let me see how it fits.
That's right. That's I love that analogy. That's great. So you told us a little bit about your journey, as a player, and then into as a ref, and then the educational side of it. So could you tell us a little bit about how Rutgers Edge came to be?
Yeah. So, basically the short story is, professionally, I ended up getting my master's in counseling and then worked in a school as a school counselor. And then on the weekends I was refereeing. So I, was doing all the college, kind of college counseling during the day during the day and during the weekdays. And then on the weekends and even weekday evenings, I was refereeing, high school and also college. And I just started, saying to certain players, after the game, hey, Johnny, that was a great game. Where are you going to college next year? And players started asking me questions, hey, I don't know, where can I go? What programs are good? What do you think? So organically, it just started, with just kind of questions, and then parents started going, hey, that referee that comes around, she knows a lot about college and also rugby. And people just started asking me questions and sending me emails. And I just thought, would it be that crazy to start a company that only focused on college rugby? And yeah, in the beginning, it was really slow because it seemed, there had never been someone who only talked about college rugby because it just wasn't at the place where you could focus on that and use that as a driver for your college search. And it's just kind of slowly been building every year, which is great. I love that over the years, I've built up a good reputation of, I'm really looking at the student as a whole and not just saying, okay, let's just talk about athletics. It really is about that entire, profile and making sure that, okay, you've got a student that actually would do better at a smaller school with more attention, but still wants to play good rugby, but it doesn't have to be super high performance. So how do we find that perfect fit for each student? Because kind of like what I was saying about being a player on a field, there are also those players that may not be the star of the field. They may not be the biggest, fastest, strongest, but they love the sport and they still want to play. And will they still make an impact and have a great time if they do play at CU Boulder, right? Or they go play at University of Oregon, or they play at UC San Diego? Absolutely. And here in the US, we just want players. I mean, the more people we can get to come and play rugby, it lifts the entire, overall rugby community. So, I mean, that's kind of how it started, is just, kind of that merge of, professionally what I was doing, and then also just not being able to stop talking about college stuff, even when I was on a rugby field. And then it just turned into this company. And yeah, it's been great. It's been great ever since.
That's amazing. I feel like your story is really similar to Chris, where he just had such a passion for it and was having all of those conversations that it was such a natural kind of progression to the creation of Study and Play, just to help those kids with that really positive experience that he had as well. I guess doing what you do, you would come across a lot of agencies that are similar to Study and Play. Why did you choose to work with Study and Play when there's a lot of people out there that kind of do what we do?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think Study and Play actually is the only other company that I recommend. And a big part of it is I think, with Chris, we share the same philosophy, that we're not just about, I think a lot of agencies, the focus is on placement. We're going to place you somewhere. And it's just, at least what I've seen is many other agencies, it's really about, you're going to pay us a bunch of money. We're going to come up with essentially a profile or, a resume, and we're just going to email blast it out to all the coaches. And they're not even understanding how rugby really works here in the US. Yeah. Right. So I think understanding that if you were to send your profile to University of Minnesota, the club coach there is like, great, that's fabulous, but I hope you apply and get in. There's nothing you can do. Right. So I think for Chris to have spent a lot of time reaching out and spending time talking to me and learning about it, so that he is not selling families on something that it's not. And I think that's a really big deal, is I'm upfront with all of my families. And I love that Study and Play USA also follows that same, like just being honest with families. It does me no good to say, oh my God, absolutely, we're going to get you a full ride to, thousands of colleges in the US, when I know that that's not the case. I'd rather say, look, these are the types of colleges that do offer some scholarship, but this is what you can expect. Yeah. And if that's not what you want, that's fine. Like, I'd rather you be educated and follow through on this pathway, but know the realistic expectations. And I think that's something that Study and Play does really well, is they'll help you through that process. But be honest with you about, like, look, like, this is where you are athletically. These are the colleges that are going to match. They're not going to say, oh, you're going to get, a gazillion offers from Harvard and Columbia and Tufts, when you've got a student with like a 2.0 GPA,
exactly,
or something like that, right? Exactly. Like taking all that in. So I think, just kind of understanding the academic and athletic sides and together. I think it's really tough to find counselors like Study and Play USA and like myself who really wear both hats. So yeah.
Absolutely.
You guys are my favorite.
Yay. Well, we love that we get to work with you. Absolutely. And we are kind of ending all of our podcasts, Karen, with just a rapid fire couple of questions for you. Okay. So, could you please tell us your favorite memory from when you were playing collegiate rugby?
Oh man, my favorite memory. Oh, there's so many. The the one that literally popped right in my head is it was my senior year and we were playing Stanford and we had lost to them every other year.
Oh, no.
So 3 years in a row,
Yeah.
we'd just been killed. And there's literally, it's like one of those essays you probably read from students, but we were down by 2 tries, I think. And I literally was like, just give me this ball. Like I'm going to score it. And I did it twice.
Oh my
We
God.
got the ball and I was like, I'm just going to, and we did, and we beat them. And that was like the first time that we'd ever done it. And it was just a really, I think I just wanted to do it for the team. I was a senior. We had seniors we were the founders of the team. And we're like, if we're going to do anything, like this is what we want to do. And it was just a good feeling that my team trusted me and kind of allowed me to carry that moment. Yeah.
Oh,
so that was a great memory.
Goosebumps. That's such a cool story. All right, next question. Will the USA win a World Cup for rugby? And if so, when?
I think women's sevens will hopefully win a World Cup. I hope they win the Olympics next year. That's actually what I'm hoping. 15s, you know what? I don't know. I think 15s is still developing a lot. My guess is probably not this next round, but maybe 2 cycles from now would be my best guess.
Great. All right. Name a U.S. college men's program to watch out for.
Ooh, to watch out for? I really like Indiana.
Okay. What about a U.S. women's program to watch out for?
U.S. women's program. This is a tough one. I think on the women's side, I would probably say Brown.
Okay.
They've kind of been hovering between Division I and Division II for NCAA, and I think they've got a fantastic coach at the helm. They've got Kathy Flores there, and I think she's had a couple years now to build and kind of get her feet wet in the NCAA, kind of sphere. And I think it's only a matter of time before she's going to bring Brown up to where kind of Harvard and Dartmouth have kind of been in that top tier and kind of always in that championship game. So I think Brown's probably going to be up and coming very soon.
Awesome. All right. I think you kind of touched on this at the start of the interview, but what is your very favorite thing about living in Colorado?
My favorite thing is just the outdoors. So just getting a chance to, we drop my daughter off at school and there's a huge, it's called just a big open space right there. We hiked with the dogs. There's just a huge herd of elk that makes us late for school every day. So, just those kinds of things don't happen anywhere else. Literally there was a bull chasing a cow, the female elk, in and around the cars. The cars were just stopped and they were just chasing each other. Yeah. So that's Colorado. I love it. I think it's great.
Oh, that is so funny. We were on a drive the other day and there were these kangaroos and they were just like, my kids were like, what would be, the Colorado version of kangaroos? And I was like, oh, maybe elk. They don't hurt anybody. They're not pests. They just are kind of around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is so funny. Well, we are just so appreciative of your time, Karen. And when things on a global level kind of calm down a little bit, we'd love to have you out in Australia.
Yeah, I would love it. I would love it, love it, love it.
So good. Well, thanks so much again for your time, and we'll catch up soon.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much. And
all
you
right,
guys take care.
We appreciate all you do. Thanks, Karen.
Okay. Bye.